He was walking alone, just another solo trek through the dense Tennessee woodlands. No GPS, no cell bars, and definitely no destination. Just nature and silence, the way he preferred it. But when former Special Forces operator Luke Callahan spotted what looked like a motionless figure half hidden beneath brush and branches, he didn't hesitate. Lying there, wrapped loosely in what remained of a weather-worn American flag, was a man barely conscious, lips cracked from thirst, mumbling a string of numbers that only someone with military history would recognize. Luke didn't pull out. His phone. He didn't hit record. He just moved, quickly, instinctively. And 24 hours later, when the whir of a military chopper pierced the quiet of the forest, the world began to understand what had really happened out there. If this gave you goosebumps, type "never alone" in the comments to honor those who still live by the code. Luke Callahan, 68, had once led covert missions overseas, but had never quite adapted to the clamor of civilian life. Traffic sirens, subway brakes, and the non-stop buzz of everyday chaos made him feel like a stranger in his own country. So after retiring, he made it a habit to disappear into the wild every few weeks. The woods were quiet. The woods didn't lie. And in the eye, silence. His senses stayed sharp, not jumpy, just ready. His gear was simple. A topo map folded with creases from hundreds of trips, a compass that had seen more war zones than most generals, and muscle memory forged in fire. Modern tech? Useless here. Trust your gut, his old instructors used to say, and he still did. It was the fourth morning of a week-long solo hike along a lesser-known offshoot of the Smokies when he stopped to refill his canteen at a mossy stream. That's when he saw it. A boot, military issue, old, caked in mud and partially buried. Civilian hikers didn't wear these. Luke's back straightened. He scanned the tree line. Then he saw it. A limp hand, then the shape of a body, slumped, at the base of a dying elm. In seconds, Luke was kneeling beside the man, his own age suddenly irrelevant as his training took over. The man was gaunt, breathing shallowly, skin the dull tone of someone who hadn't eaten or drunk in days. His torso was partially wrapped in what looked like a folded American flag. Grimy, tattered but handled with reverence. This wasn't trash. This was sacred to whoever had carried it. The stranger was whispering something again and again, barely audible. Luke leaned in and caught it. Echo 3-4. Over and over. Not screaming, not begging. Just repeating, as if trying to hold on to himself. There were no signs of a campsite, no gear, no pack, not even ID. Just this broken man and that fading flag. Luke didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He pulled out his compact medkit, opened a bottle of water, and slowly let the man sip. Too much, too fast, and it'd do more harm than good. He laid down his own rolled jacket beneath the man's head and cut away parts of his shirt to bind up scrapes and gashes on the man's legs. "You're not dying today," he muttered. Not a pep talk, more like an order. "Not out here. Not on my watch." The woods were remote. No cell tower in range, no trails marked. The kind of place you had to know to even find. Luke sized up the situation like it was a battlefield. Dehydration, exposure, minor head trauma, probably from a fall, nothing instantly fatal, but left. Untreated? It was a matter of hours. Night was closing in. Temps would drop fast. Luke built a fire, not for comfort, but as a beacon. 3 fires in a triangle. It was a survival code used by anyone trained to call for rescue without a radio. A message: "I'm here. I need help." The man kept muttering his unit code, like a vinyl record stuck in the same groove. Echo 3-4. Echo 3-4. Luke had heard that tone before, not in war movies, but in real firefights, in bunkers, in medevacs, when men on the edge of death spoke not to family or friends, but to their brothers in arms, the ones who always came when no one else did. Luke kept him alive through the night. He rationed what little water he had. He pressed soaked bandanas from the stream onto the man's forehead to drop the fever. Every hour he checked the pulse, monitored breathing, applied gauze where he could. His own body screamed from the cold and fatigue, but it didn't matter. Comfort wasn't the mission. Keeping this man breathing was. He found a photo in the man's back pocket, miraculously dry in a Ziploc. Two soldiers stood smiling, uniforms covered in dirt and pride. One looked like the man he'd just stabilized. The other, a mystery. But the patch on their sleeves made everything click. Echo Company, 34th Battalion, Korea era, decades before Luke had ever worn a uniform. But the bond? Same. With first light cracking through the treetops, Luke strapped on his gear and climbed a steep ridge half a mile away to hunt for signal. His boots slipped on damp shale, his knees groaned, but he pushed forward. 1 bar. That's all he needed. He sent a message to a number from an old notebook, one that hadn't been used since the Bush administration. Just a set of coordinates, and 2 words: operator down. Back at the campfire, the man's breathing was thinner than before. Luke sat beside him again, wiping sweat from the man's neck with a torn strip of his own sleeve. "Just stay with me," he said softly, voice low like he was talking to a buddy pinned in a foxhole. "Reinforcements are inbound." By afternoon, they heard it. Not thunder, not birds. The heavy thump of rotor blades growing louder. Luke dragged himself to a nearby clearing and raised the folded flag high above his head, waving it in wide arcs, the unmistakable symbol of urgency and identity. A blackhawk broke through the clouds, descending like a god of war on a rescue mission. Medics hit the ground before the wheels touched dirt. One spotted Luke and called out, "Master Chief Callahan?" He just nodded. "Didn't need a name," he replied. "Just knew he was one of us." The medics rushed to stabilize the man, Jackson. They now confirmed, and began IVs, vitals, and oxygen masks with fluid efficiency. One officer turned to Luke. "You found Sergeant Jackson?" He nodded again, this time with a heaviness in his chest. Didn't know who he was. Only knew he needed someone. As the medics lifted Jackson onto the stretcher and began strapping him in, Luke stood silently, watching the blades of the Blackhawk whip the forest floor into a storm of leaves and dust. His hands dropped to his sides, dirt streaking his palms, the smell of smoke and pine heavy in the air. No one asked him if he needed a lift. He didn't ask either. Some walks, especially the ones that matter, you finish on your own. Jackson, age 74, had been missing for 3 days. His family had filed reports, and the VA had launched a quiet alert. No one had been able to reach him. No text replies, no calls returned. They didn't know that the anniversary of a long-ago ambush had triggered a dissociative episode. Jackson had wandered off into the woods with no medication, no supplies, and no clear idea of where or who he was. His grandchildren had already started drafting eulogies. But a stranger, who owed him nothing, had kept him alive long enough to come home. At the base hospital, it took a few IVs, a warm room, and 48 hours before Jackson was speaking again. His voice was hoarse, but steady. His thoughts, finally clear. When he saw Luke sitting at the foot of his bed, still dirty from the hike, still quiet, he asked, "Was it you out there?" Luke gave a slow smile, that kind you only see from men who've buried too many memories. "Had to be someone," he said. "Figured it might as well be me." The story broke online 2 days later. It wasn't filmed. It wasn't staged, but somehow the silence of that act made more noise than most publicized heroics. Headlines read, "Ex-Special Forces rescues forgotten veteran from wilderness without tech, without glory." Reporters reached out. Morning shows wanted interviews, but Luke declined them all. "Not a story," he told a persistent journalist who cornered him outside the hospital. "Just a promise, soldier to soldier. That's all." The local veteran support office held a small private ceremony. Jackson, still bruised but standing tall, spoke into a mic with one hand on his son's shoulder. "I thought I'd been left behind," he admitted, voice cracking on the last word. "Thought no one remembered us old guys anymore. But a man I'd never met, someone who didn't owe me a damn thing, found me when I couldn't find myself. No." One clapped. They didn't need to. The room, filled with men and women who'd worn uniforms and buried friends, understood. Silence was the applause that mattered. General Hale from Special Operations Command stepped forward, handing Luke a wooden plaque. Not the plastic kind you get at banquets, but real oak, carved from a decommissioned destroyer. The inscription read, "For keeping the fire lit when others couldn't." Luke nodded, said nothing. A week later, the president sent a formal letter, gold seal, ornate script. Luke tucked it behind his coat rack, not out of modesty, but because some things aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be remembered. It was Jackson, not the VA, who gave Luke what he valued most. A shoulder patch from Bravo 34, removed from his own shadow box at home. "This belongs with someone who still answers the call," he'd said. Luke stitched it inside his rucksack, not on the outside, not for show, just so he'd carry it every time he walked into the woods again. When asked later by a high school paper why he had done it, why he'd used the last of his water, sat in the cold, risked infection, all for a stranger, Luke's answer was quiet, but solid. "You don't need rank to recognize pain. You just need heart. And because I know someone would have done it for me." That was the last time he spoke publicly on it. But the effect didn't end there. Across the country, veterans from different branches, different decades, started sharing stories, not on TikTok or Instagram, but in small groups, in bars, in VA waiting rooms, tales of unspoken loyalty, of medics who still sent holiday cards to soldiers they patched up, of Marines who visited graves alone every year, of quiet salutes exchanged in parking lots, never explained. Jackson's own son, a retired Marine captain, summed it up best in a small-town interview. "My father survived a jungle war only to nearly die in his own backyard, but the same brotherhood that pulled him out of hell once did it again. Different war, same code. As media cycles moved on, so did the world. But something subtle had shifted. People remembered, if only for a while, that not all battles come with medals. Some are fought in silence, some are just about staying. A month after the rescue, the VA installed a new bench outside their center, facing the tree line. Simple wood, no backrest, but sturdy. The engraving read, "For those who still wait, and those who still show up." Luke visits it every Saturday, thermos of black coffee in hand. Sometimes Jackson joins. They don't talk much. Sometimes they don't talk at all. Hikers now leave handwritten notes tucked under the bench, some from kids, some from old-timers. Active duty soldiers have started saluting it, not for Luke, but for what it stands for. The bench has become something else, not a tribute to one moment, but a thread in something bigger, a bond, a vow, an unbroken line of watchers. Jackson later asked the local park service if they'd rename a trail that cut through that stretch of woods. They did. Echo Trail. At its entrance stands a plaque, just a metal square bolted to a tree. No ribbon cutting, no ceremony. Just the words, "In honor of the ones who remembered." Local scout troops now clear the trail each season, making sure it's passable, making sure no one else gets lost there. When SEAL trainees ask Luke about the most dangerous mission he ever faced, he doesn't talk about firefights or extraction zones. He doesn't mention the time he got pinned down in a firefight or crawled for miles with a broken rib. He says, "The one where all you can do is sit beside someone and pray they breathe through the night." That one, they usually don't get it, not right away. But someday they will. Luke still hikes, still uses a compass, not an app. But now he carries a personal beacon, not for himself, but because Jackson's daughter mailed him one with a note. "So we don't lose you too. And Jackson, He speaks now, once a month at his VA. Soft-spoken, but firm. He tells counselors and volunteers, look for the quiet ones. They're the ones slipping away. He knows. Because he almost disappeared in plain sight. On some nights, when the sky is clear and the wind still, Luke sits on his porch and remembers the fire he lit deep in the woods. How it glowed against the darkness. How it meant help was coming. That someone saw them. That the night wouldn't last forever. Some fights are won with bullets, others with presence. But both forge bonds that time can't erode. If this story moved you, subscribe to Steelheart Stories and type "Honor Remains" in the comments, because loyalty doesn't expire, it simply waits to be called.